and that is Mirage. Oh my gosh. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey. We're about to get very, very nerdy with all of the books that I read in March. Plus one. So today I thought I'd go through all of the books that I read in the month of March. I had a little bit better reading month than February, I think. I honestly cannot remember. I feel like I only read 3 in February. But I read 4 in March, but I'm going to talk about 5 today because technically there's one that I finished in April, but it doesn't count as part of my Owl Readathon, so I'm going to include it in this wrap-up as well because I finished it on like the 2nd of April or something, so like super early on. So yeah, let's just go right into the books that I read this month. The first book that I read this month was Becoming by Michelle Obama. I listened to this one on audiobook, and I'm really glad I did it that way because I don't think I could have physically read it just because it is such a thick book, and not just because like it's like a pretty, I wouldn't call it a pretty chunky book, but it definitely has quite a lot to it, but it also is like very thick in like the topic, and it's very like paragraph heavy. But I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was really cool because the audiobook was narrated by Michelle Obama, which I feel like is the only appropriate way to do an audiobook of any kind of memoir or nonfiction about somebody. So I was really excited about that. And yeah, I just loved learning about it. I learned a lot more about the normal day-to-day going-ons, I guess you would call them, in the White House. It is a little political, just because, you know, you're in the White House, you kind of, there's not really a way to not be political, but it didn't focus on a lot of things. So I thought it was really, really interesting, and with the kind of things that she did in the White House that like I didn't even know about. And I don't know, it's I feel like it's very inspiring, and no matter who you are reading this, I feel like just gives you that extra oomph to like do what you want and do what you love to do. I liked it a lot, and like I said, I think I wouldn't have liked it as much if I had just like physically read it. I don't think I'd ever have finished it if I had physically read it. But the audiobook is like 24 hours long. Like, it's not a short audiobook, so you have to like dedicate time to this book. If you really like memoirs about people, or if you are interested in all in the like Obama era of the White House, especially from her point of view, I think it was just really interesting. And nonfiction, especially memoirs, are not something that I read a whole lot. I'm very glad that I ended up reading it, and like I said, I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished was Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. This is the third, yes, I can count. This is the third book in my Jane Austen reread / reading all of her books that I'm kind of participating in, and Mansfield Park was March's, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. So I love Jane Austen, I do. I really enjoy her stories. This one was not my favorite, and kind of like Becoming, if I hadn't have listened to it on audiobook, I probably would have DNF'd it about 5 times. It is a thick book. It is so big. It's probably one of her biggest. Maybe Emma's about the same, I don't actually know, but it felt like her biggest work. And it just, there were some things that were interesting about it, but overall it was just hard to get into. It's also not my favorite story out of all of hers, I will admit that, so I kind of came into it not being as excited, I guess you would say, as some of the other ones, but it just dragged. I thought it was really, really interesting because, like all of her other books, marriage is a huge topic. There's like not really any way to be in this era, I feel like, especially since all of her main characters are female, to be in this era and not have marriage be like a huge topic. But this one was different because some of the other ones, most of the other ones, the main kind of like point of the story is that in the end the couple will get together. That's just kind of how it is. This one was different. It was not necessarily focused on that. It was kind of like that was an afterthought. I found it really interesting that the very last like chapter in the book was Jane Austen basically like taking her step back and being like, hey, so I'm the author, let me tell you about what happened to all these people that I've been telling you a story about. And that just happened to be like one thing in it, but it wasn't like the main purpose. So I kind of found that was really, really interesting. Whereas if you've seen like movie adaptations of Mansfield Park, that's like the goal of the movie. And like that's the big climax at the end, is like when the couple gets together. And that's like not what this was about. So yeah, Not my favorite, but I didn't hate it either, so that's why I think I gave it 3.5 stars. The third book that I finished in March is Damsel by Anna K. Arnold. I've been reading this since January, which is sad considering this book is like barely 300 pages. Like, it's not long at all. I ended up giving this one 3 stars, which I think is pretty generous because I find the writing beautiful. I love the way things were described. There are like definite chunks in this book that I just could like read over and over. It was hard to care some of the time. I couldn't stand the guy, which you're not supposed to. So he was extra and I just couldn't get on board with him. Everything he talked about drove me insane. And like every time he tried to be a good person, he would turn around and be a jerk the next second, and I just wanted to punch him in the face. And so any little time our main character would like slightly rebel, it was like, yes, go, you can do this, because I'm so tired of him. But what really messed me up was the ending, and if you've read the ending, I feel like you'll know what I'm talking about. It's literally in the very last paragraph, or the very last chapter, which is like 3 pages. It is the weirdest thing I have ever read in my entire life, and I will not spoil it for anyone who wants to read the book. It's been a couple weeks since I finished it, and I still don't have words to describe what I read. It was bizarre. I think I would give this author another chance, but I didn't love this book specifically. The next book that I read in March, aka the very last book that I read in March, is Obsidio by Jay Kaufman and Amy Kristoff. I finally finished the Illuminae files. It was so good. I loved it so much. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I do think that Illuminae, out of the 3, Illuminae is my favorite, but this one I think this one's a good close second. I loved it. I loved it so much. And I think it was really interesting because there are things that like happen at like literally the end of the first book that I completely forgotten about, and then they show up in this one and I'm like, oh yeah, oh I forgot about that thing that was really important. So if you can binge this series, I feel like that's better. Unless you have like a really good photographic memory, you're probably going to forget things, especially considering like these pages are, yes, they're mixed media format, and yes, they're not like paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs, but this is probably the thinnest book, and I think it's like 500 pages. Actually, I lied. This book is over 600 pages, and I believe it's the thinnest out of the 3. I really enjoyed this one because it was a very good conclusion. It just wrapped everything up from the first 2. I am so glad that I was finally able to finish the series. I am sad to see it go. It was fun, but I definitely enjoyed it, especially the last 2 where I was able to listen to the audiobook as well as read along. I feel like that's the best way to read this series, is to listen to the full cast audiobook with sound effects and like the whole shebang, as well as read the book. It just made it a well-rounded experience, and I really, really enjoyed it. So, highly loved this series, and I'm sad to see it go, but I'm happy that I was able to finish it. So the last book that I'm going to talk about today is the book that I technically finished in April, but it was so close to it and it's not part of the Owls that I'm going to include it here, and that is Mirage by Samoya Daoud. This is one that I got in the September Owl Crate, and I just happened to stumble across the audiobook on Scribd, and I was able to listen to it in the last like few days of the month, hoping to like get one more in before the readathon started. I gave this one 4 stars. It's super thin. It's not a very thick book, but it is the first in a trilogy. Because I did listen to it on audiobook, I think that helped and hurt me. I definitely missed some of the like world building a little bit. On the flip side of that, there is kind of like a whole nother language. Actually, there's multiple languages in here, and I would never have been able to like pronounce any of the words in that language. I would have just skimmed over it, and it was so beautiful to listen to the woman who was doing the audiobook just like speak it. Oh, I loved it so much. So I definitely wouldn't have had that if I had just read it. So I am glad that I did the audiobook. I did get very, very strong Children of Blood and Bone vibes from this. It is like sci-fi, which I found interesting because half the time I honestly forgot that it was sci-fi and that it wasn't like a fantasy book. But at the same time, it felt really real. Like, I could believe this culture, this world, all of this exists, which might be because it is based on a real culture, which I do think helped. It definitely gave it that extra like real feel. But yeah, I'm really glad that I read this. As of right now, I would definitely continue on because this is not finished it all and I need to know more. Like, you can't just end like that. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. So that is it. Those are all of the books that I read in March, kind of April. And yeah, now it's on to the readathon. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you want to be part of this awesome growing family I've got going on over here. And all my social media is down below if you'd like to follow along on that. And I will see you guys in my next video.